actually was on a focus of nuclear power, which we do consider the other side of the coin regarding the nuclear industry with weapons and power. And so I was arrested in 1979 protesting Seabrook Nuclear Power Plant. And we were given 9-month sentences for leafleting at the Public Service Corporation headquarters protesting this new nuclear power plant that ultimately did go online. And we served 3 months, 5 of us, who all happened to be Catholics at the time. And it was from there that I moved into other areas. I didn't do any protesting while I was raising my family from 1979 to 2007. And since 2007, we've been engaged in issues relating to torture of prisoners at Guantanamo, the use of drones for targeted assassinations, and war in general, the permanent war economy that we find ourselves in today. And so my engagement with Plowshares action was, I'd heard about the actions. They began in the 1980s with Phil Berrigan. And it took me a very long time to come to a place of understanding, of discernment about whether I could do such a thing. And I would say I had been thinking about it for at least the past 6 years. And then this action took us, I felt that it took me a good 2 years to prepare for this. And so I was exposed to the horrors of nuclear weapons in my childhood, reading John Hershey's Hiroshima, knowing that my grandmother, Dorothy, was protesting, reading this incredible piece that she wrote in September of 1945, describing what it felt like for her to witness that. And so I have been acutely aware my entire life of this. I was born 10 years after the dropping of the bomb. And so I found myself living in community and living in a way that made me ask the question, what can I do to help? What can I do to participate in raising a voice against this insidious, horrific trajectory that we're on? I've also traveled to Iran and Korea. And of course, our current president has directly threatened both of those countries. And so when Jesus tells us to love our enemy, it's really important to go visit the enemy. And that's exactly what I did with these travels. The Iranian people are beautiful people. And the South Koreans are desperate to leave behind this U.S. occupation and militarization. And so I felt it was all part of living in solidarity with everyone else on the planet to participate in this nonviolent, faith-based direct action. This is the U.S. Navy's nuclear submarine base. It's the largest submarine base on the planet. It houses and maintains, I believe, 6 to 8 nuclear submarines, and that includes maintaining the British fleet of 3 Tridents there. We just recently learned that. It's a very huge campus. It's like 17,000 acres. It's much larger than Monaco, as a friend recently pointed out. And that is where they store nuclear warheads. That is where they have the Strategic Weapons Facility Atlantic Administration building, where the orchestration of how to take care of this nuclear fleet occurs, where any orders to use them, I would assume, would be involved with that at the base. The action was to challenge this nuclear fleet because it is so deadly and it is so efficient in its ability to destroy all life on Earth, and we wanted to address the Trident submarines. We were held for nearly 2 months,
Yeah.
and 4 of us, there are 7 of us, and 4 of us are still in prison down there. And we were processed on the base immediately after the arrest by the military, and the military handed us over to the local county jail, and we were kept in Camden County Detention Center in Woodbine, Georgia. And state charges were brought against us at the time: trespass, carrying tools to commit a crime in order to get into the base. And then, about a month into our detention, we were handed federal charges, 4 different charges. And it was at that point that we were brought to a different facility in Brunswick, Georgia, and kept there for nearly 3 weeks before 3 of us agreed to go with the conditional release of being monitored. Carmen is monitored. Right now I'm not, but I will be remonitored when I go back to Vermont. We have a wonderful legal team, and we are planning to go pro se, some of us, as in the tradition of the Plowshares movement. And we have a pre-motions trial, pre-trial motions date of August 2nd. And it is at that point that we will have the parameters of how we will be able to conduct our defense, and we should be getting a trial date, which we're hoping should be sometime in the early fall. It's federal charges. It'll be federal court.
I'm under supervised release.
Okay.
And so I have a GPS device on my ankle. I have an ankle bracelet that you could feel welcome to photograph. And since the conditions initially were really very, very restrictive, and in certain ways they're still restricted. But even today I went to see my supervisor, and some of the restrictions were lifted. So as of, yeah. So to be able to be present at this hour at Mary House, that is a new freedom for me. I do think it's very much in the spirit of the court's ruling, because the court did come to understand. For both Martha and I, the court did something that was unusual, which is they allowed us to go between 2 different districts. And so my district is on Long Island with my father. My father's 90 years old, and 3.5 days of the week I spend out there trying to give him, to be helpful with him, whether it's cooking meals or doing shopping or taking him to the bank. And then 3.5 days I'm out here, where I've been for 31 years or thereabouts, at the Catholic Worker. And today was able to get the sort of agreement that this is one community in 2 different adjacent spaces, and that it would be helpful to be sort of as constantly available. So yeah, so very happy that those modifications were made. Otherwise, it was really they were just very stringent. It was hard to, day-to-day life was, yeah, difficult. Well, at one point in the process, in a first bond hearing, I was told that I had an extensive criminal record, and that was sort of shocking to me, because I never thought of any of the actions I did as criminal, because I've never been arrested for anything other than nonviolent civil disobedience. Out of college, I went to the Catholic Worker. I went to the Des Moines Catholic Worker, and I was at the Des Moines Catholic Worker for a couple of years. My first arrest involved the setting up of corridors. The United States seems to be setting up invasion corridors into Nicaragua at the time, into Sandinista Nicaragua. And so that was the first, having studied that for a period of time. El Salvador, Nicaragua, you may remember, when I was in college, there was a popular bumper sticker that said El Salvador is Spanish for Vietnam. There's a certain amount of truth to that. And so that was the first thing that appeared on the radar. As it turned out, also at the Des Moines Catholic Worker was the first place I had heard of. Previously, I had heard of the Berrigans. I'd heard of the Berrigan brothers. And I didn't know who they were. They were, in my category, at least initially, they were the odd people from the 60s and 70s. And you could include Bob Dylan and Abby Hoffman and this whole series of names and personalities. And I knew that name, and I knew they were priests. And in my realm, in the place that I came from, they were considered sort of crazy. And at the Des Moines Catholic Worker was the first time that I found a book by them, um, and that I read some of the writings of Dan Berrigan, and I thought it was some of the most beautiful stuff that I had ever heard. Um, and so at that first protest, I went to the first protest. We took over the governor's office in Des Moines, Iowa, and we sat in. And I sat there all day reading The Raft is Not the Shore, which is a book by Dan Berrigan and Thich Nhat Hanh, and from Vietnam, a Vietnamese Buddhist monk. So in a certain way, I began to sort of follow the career of the Berrigans, and certainly had heard about the Plowshares 8 and the first Plowshares action. The interesting to know, like, it shouldn't really be forgotten, the timing of that action. Part of it was the renewed urgency, because what became clear in 1980 or thereabouts was that the nuclear capacity of the United States was a first strike capacity. This was not a deterrent so much as this was now an offensive weapon. So again, at this moment in time, the utter exasperation of so many in the world with the Non-Proliferation Treaty, or rather the United States abuse of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, of never having gone into good faith negotiations to exterminate nuclear weapons, which is what the treaty was for. And now we are, that's the 1970s, we are how many years on? And then in 2015, with the NPT conference, again provoked sort of outrage on the part of the United States for neglecting its actual treaty obligations. And you have ICANN, you have the birth of ICANN, comes from utter frustration with US policy. So now if you look at Donald Trump's new nuclear posture review, and you can go back. I don't want to dump it on Trump. It was Obama too. We're going to refurbish all our nuclear weapons. We're also altering our nuclear weapons. We're targeting them even more precisely, and these are treaty violations. And so once again, our action comes up at a time where this issue has become very heated. Trump's, who knows where Trump's where his conversations with Korea will go. You hesitate to comment on anything. So you were so hopeful that the two Koreas can be one. We're so hopeful that but tomorrow he may unfriend Kim Jong-un, if I say the name right. So I mentioned a story early on for myself also. The Jeremy Scahill, who is a great war reporter, is a great. He's at the First Look Intercept, and he runs that news outlet. Jeremy Scahill said to me once when he was living here, and he lived at the Catholic Worker for a period of time. One day, just almost randomly, he came up to me and he said, "Did you hear about North Korea?" He said there was a Plowshares action in North Korea. He said, "Yeah, they arrested several North Korean activists at a base, and the North Koreans said that they wanted to destroy the weapons because." Out of love for our brothers and sisters in the United States. And it was breathtaking. And then it was a joke. He started laughing. But it was an interesting moment because, to think that they would do that, to think that they would have that to say, to think they would do it under the extraordinary circumstances that they would face, made me this very strong embrace of the Plowshares movement, that some people had done that had risked that.
We had friends who were working last March and July at the UN here in town, and who tried to participate and were very excited about what was coming out of that. And I do feel that our taking action was a way to support that effort, that global, that international effort. And I was incredibly disappointed at how little mainstream media coverage there was of this new treaty. And so, I haven't studied it extensively. It's pretty exciting how many nations do want to sign on. I think there's only 50-something signatories at this point in time. Of course, the 9 nuclear weapons states are dragging their feet, but we're hoping, like apartheid, like slavery, like all of the horrific things we've practiced in our history, that will evolve to a place of understanding that this is unacceptable, and the nuclear weapons states will be put under enough pressure to be brought along with this effort. I wasn't fully surprised. I was very glad. I was happy to hear that. And I recently heard an interview by, is it Beatrice Fine? Is that her name? The woman who headed ICANN? And she was recently speaking on, I believe, Scahill's show, Intercept. And she talked about how incredibly dangerous these weapons are. And as long as we hold on to them, they will be used at some point. And so the bravery and the persistence on the part of ICANN was something to behold. And I'm very happy to hear that the Nobel Peace Prize went there. I mean, the whole thing that went on with Obama receiving the prize in the midst of. So it brought a little bit of integrity back to the. And some of my Korean friends have given me a bit of feedback about it. And they're saying, well, it doesn't have a lot of specifics or any teeth to it. It's very much public posturing, but at least it's positive. I was a little embarrassed and uncomfortable with how the Democrats responded to it. It's like they're like the war party at this point, and just the absurdity of the Democrats criticizing a Republican like Trump, where he is taking some steps. And a lot of my Korean friends are saying they don't expect a lot from that quarter, but it opens the door for the people. It's going to come from the people to really fill that space and make it happen. This is a long process. I mean, before I got involved, I was told you need to block out 5 years of your life for this. And so we're at the very beginning of the legal process, and I am in it for the long haul. And, you know, my family and my community are the most important support system to this, as well as my faith. And so I hope to continue to speak and write about what we did and what we're trying to accomplish here, and get the world to wake up to. I mean, I think the thing that strikes me so strongly is how so many people didn't even know that this naval base existed, and the capacity we have for covering up and denying the realities of our nuclear arsenal. So our job is to expose all of that. To educate ourselves. I think that the Poor People's Campaign that's happening right now is a beautiful, incredible thing. And it's all about educating ourselves and empowering ourselves. So I'm hoping that all of these issues can be connected as one great piece of work. Housing, jobs, voter registration, nuclear arsenal, all of these things are interrelated to what sustains empire and how the people can regain their voices. And we'll keep in that vein.
So interesting to notice the close friendships of the 7 Catholic activists that were all a part of this. So 4 of those 7 traveled to Guantanamo together in 2005 while the prisoners were on hunger strike at Guantanamo. As an attempt to call attention to that, as the attempt to call attention again to yet another treaty violation on the part of the United States. So yeah, there's a lot of history among these. How many of the, almost all of them bear very strong relationships if they don't live at or help run Catholic worker communities. So there's a great deal of sort of integrity in the group. Father Steve is a disciple of sort of Dan Berrigan, and very courageous himself. All of our meetings, and we met for months and months, were sort of surrounded by the Mass, by the daily readings, by daily reflections with each other. So the roots of this, as regards the roots in the Catholic faith, are very, very strong. Um, and then, I don't know, at some point, part of what Martha was talking about, the sort of ignorance generally um, of the American people regarding our own history, that somehow we have managed to continue thinking that we um, are pro-democracy around the world. No, our allies are Saudi Arabia and Egypt. We're right now in the middle of MSNBC in all of 2017 did not do a single report on Yemen. The United States is complicit in the destruction of the nation of Yemen. 1,000 children die each week in Yemen of easily preventable diseases and hunger. This is ongoing. In fact, just the other day was the bombing of the port of Hodeidah, which has been the nightmare scenario that the humanitarian agencies at the United Nations have been so troubled about. And for the most part, it has received no media attention. And so Americans continue to go about their daily lives thinking that the United States plays some positive function globally. And, you know, it was Dwight David Eisenhower who talked to us about the military-industrial complex. The phrase doesn't come from the hippies. It was picked up by them, but it comes from Eisenhower. And what Eisenhower said that the American people needed was an informed electorate, that they could take nothing for granted in the face of the military-industrial complex, which has grown vastly more complex than it was when he said it in 1960-61. So much so that the complete revamping of our nuclear weapons systems, of every aspect of the system, is nothing more than a massive boondoggle that will help the very wealthy who have their investments in the producers of military weapons. So, and I think in a certain way, our group is that informed electorate. Except most of us at this point, there's no one to vote for. We're so far afield, there's no one to vote for. Bernie Sanders may have been a change in that atmosphere, but a great failure of the Democratic Party to essentially isolate him out. I was actually in Germany shortly before the election took place. I was in Bavaria. I have good friends there, a person who used to volunteer here at the Catholic Worker. The family runs a newspaper, and they ran a newspaper for generations, including when the Nazis took over. The Nazis sort of took over their newspaper too. And my friend's father was there, very elderly in his late 80s or 90s. And he said, is it possible that Trump will become president? And I said, I got to tell you, I said, I'm sorry, but it is possible. And I've never seen it before in my life. He blanched. He was an older man. He blanched. His face went white. And the fear of it, so the fear of it was very real. And it was somehow healthy for me to get a sense of that fear from a German in Bavaria who had lived through that era. So, yeah.
So this was written in September of 1945, Dorothy's witness, so to speak, of the destruction of the Japanese cities. Mr. Truman was jubilant. President Truman, true man. What a strange name. Come to think of it. We refer to Jesus Christ as true God and true man. Truman is a true man at a time in that he was jubilant. He was not a son of God, a brother of Christ, a brother of the Japanese, jubilating as he did. He went from table to table on the cruiser, which was bringing him home from the Big Three conference, telling the great news. Jubilant, the newspaper said, Jubilate Deo, we have killed 318,000 Japanese. That is, we hope we have killed them, the Associated Press on page 1, column 1 of the Herald Tribune says. The effect is hoped for, not known. It is to be hoped that they are vaporized, our Japanese brothers, scattered, men, women, and babies, to the four winds, over the seven seas. Perhaps we will breathe their dust into our nostrils, feel them in the fog of New York on our faces. Feel them in the rain on the hills of Easton.